Ladies and gentlemen, federal employees, welcome to this episode. And today we're going to be talking about how much you are paying out of your pocket every single year to invest inside the TSP and how that compares to elsewhere, because I am sick and tired of some people saying, hey, the TSP has the lowest fees in the world, which nowadays is simply not even close to true. Now, are the fees low? Yes. Now, before we dive in, I want to say I absolutely love the TSP for lots of reasons. We'll dig into some of those, but I want to clear the record once and for all that the TSP fees are not as competitively low as they used to be. Now, they're still very low. Still a great place to have money. However, you have to know what's out there so you can be educated on what all your options are, especially as you move into retirement, especially as you have an option to maybe move to an IRA, move to a Vanguard or Fidelity, wherever outside the TSP. You got to know what the TSP is competing against so that you can make the best decision for you. So we're going to dive in. Now, on my screen here, I'm going to be sharing a couple things now from the podcast. You won't be able to see that, but I'll be able to walk you through it as best I possibly can, okay? So what I'm sharing right now is from the TSP website. If you just Google TSP fees, it'll pull right up. Basically, each of the different 5 core funds in the TSP, right? You have the G fund, the F, the C, S, and I. Those are the 5. And they each have different fees. Now, some of you may be saying, what? I didn't know there was fees. I didn't know I had to pay money to invest in the TSP fund. And the answer is yes, you definitely do. Now, in the summer of 2022, there's going to be actually a mutual fund window, and the fees associated with that I talked about in a previous video, and they're going to be astronomically high. Right? So as a general rule, you don't want to use those, but again, we'll see what it actually looks like when that time comes. Now, I'm talking about the fees for just the core TSP funds, right? The ones that your money has to be in outside, of course, the L funds. And the L funds are just a mixture of the 5 core funds, right? So each of the 5 core funds has a different expense ratio, which basically an expense ratio is what you pay as a percentage of your account balance per year. For example, for the G fund here, you pay 0.043%. Now, that sounds like a small number, and it is a very, very small number. Again, we're going to compare that to other funds out there and how it compares. So the G fund actually has the lowest fees along with the C fund. The one with the highest fees is the S fund. Now, they're all relatively close. They're not too far away from each other. So what does that mean in dollars and cents? Because a percentage, we might as well just say marshmallows, right? Who knows what a percentage is until we put that into dollars and cents. So let's do that. Let's say, okay, what is 0.059% or whatever it is? What does that mean in dollars and cents for you? Okay, let's do some math. Let's say, so for you, this is what you have to do to figure out what it costs you to invest in the TSP. So let's say you're investing in the S fund, okay? The one with the highest fees. Now, they're all about the same, but the one with the highest fees as of this point. Okay, so what you do, you take 0.00059, okay, and you times that by your account balance. So let's say you have $500,000, right? So let's say you got $500,000 in your TSP. You multiply those together. Well, what do you get? Well, you get $295 that you pay to invest in that fund every single year. Now, maybe you didn't know about this and it's like, wow, I didn't know I was paying $300 just to invest in the S fund every year. Well, you are. Now, let's compare that to other funds. Now, if you go outside the TSP, the reason outside the TSP kind of gets a bad reputation is because there are, in fact, many funds that do have very, very high expense ratios where you're paying even close to 2% sometimes, depending on what fund you're in, right? So if you're outside the TSP, there are funds that you could pay huge, huge fees. Now, if you're investing, maybe you have an old 401k, maybe your spouse has an IRA or 401k, look at those fees that you're paying. And if they're high, change the funds, change them. You don't want to be paying for things you don't need. So change them if you don't need them. Now, is this the best you can do? Right? We just learned, hey, maybe you're paying $300 on $500,000 in a TSP. Is that the best you can do? Well, let's look around. What if we look at Vanguard? So Vanguard has a fund called the Vanguard Total Stock Market ETF, or VTI. So what do you pay? Well, the expense ratio there is 0.03%. Now, that's almost half of what you're paying in the TSP, right? So if you're paying, let's say, $300 to invest in the C fund, well, you'd pay about $150 every year to invest in this fund, right? So there's certainly funds out there that are cheaper, if not just as good as the TSP, but even cheaper. And the performance basically identical. Now, let me take it actually one step further. So Fidelity, okay, if you've heard of Fidelity, they're just like a big bank, right? Like Vanguard, Bank of America, big bank, right? Where you could go invest money. Fidelity actually now has funds that have a 0 expense ratio, 0%. Meaning it doesn't cost you to invest in them. Now, sometimes with these funds, they have to pass on things like trading fees and stuff like that, but still, next to nothing, 0. So, next time you hear someone say, hey, wow, the TSP fees are the best you can possibly get, it's like, well, that's not true. That's not true. Now, are the TSP fees very low relatively to most things? Yes. Yes, they are. But the good news is if you do roll your money to an IRA, you decide. You decide how it's invested. You decide which funds to invest in. And you could pick ones that are lower fee, that do just as well, right? So for example, this Fidelity 0 large cap. So this is very, very similar to the C fund. The C fund is going to perform basically identically with the C fund for a 0 expense ratio, right? So again, the TSP is not bad. The TSP is simple. It does a great job of accumulating wealth during your career. Does it make sense for you in retirement? Well, it depends on your goals. And I talk to people all the time about this. It depends on the goals. Now, is there sometimes more complexity in an IRA? Well, there could be if you're not familiar with managing an IRA. Because the TSP, often you've been managing money there for your entire career, so you're used to it, right? But an IRA certainly has more flexibility. You have certainly more choice of funds that have lower fees and things like that. So really it comes down to where do you want to manage your money, and is it worth the cost of wherever that is? Because fees are not inherently bad. They're not. We pay money for stuff all the time, whether it's a vacation, whether for our homes. We pay tons of money for our homes and the things we care about because it's worth it to us. The issue is whenever we're investing in a fund, often we can replace that exact same fund for less money. Okay, so think about it. For you, what makes sense? Is it worth, let's say it does cost you an extra $150 a year. Well, that's not very much. Is that worth it to you to be in the TSP? What about the other things that come into play with being in the TSP in retirement? Whether it's, okay, there's less flexibility in the TSP, right? Whenever you take money out, you can't decide which fund to pull it out of. And what if the market's down? You don't want to pull out money from the C fund when the market's down. You want to just pull from maybe a conservative fund like the G fund. Well, the TSP, it's hard to do it. It's hard to do it. There's a workaround, but it's kind of painful, right? And you got to be really on it, which no one wants to be watching their TSP every day in retirement, right? So there's definitely some things that you can't do in the TSP that you can do in an IRA. Again, the TSP is simple and does a really, really high quality job when it comes to most 401k-like plans. So I'm not opposed to it at all. It can do still great things for you. You just have to have your eyes wide open, know all the options for you. So I hope that was helpful. If you have any comments on what you like or maybe not like about the TSP, and again, I'll keep you updated as we learn more about the mutual fund window and the new investment options coming up here in the summer, and we're going to go from there. So I hope that was helpful. Have an incredible rest of your day. We'll talk soon.